Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Boroughs and Burbs, Season 4, Episode 124. I'm your host, John Engel from New Canaan, Connecticut, right outside New York City. And that's my co-host.
I'm Roberto Cabrera on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I work for Brown Harris Stevens, and we're excited to be in London.
78th Street?
Stop.
I never get that right. Okay, center of the universe, Manhattan, New York. Today, we have Laura Dam Villena and Ed Hopkinson-Woolley from Knight Frank. Now, Roberto, let's start with the fact that I guess it was a year ago, you said, oh, the Wealth Report. I love the Wealth Report. Do you know those people? And I was like, I know those people. I just went whale watching with Patty Dring. Of course I know those people. Can we do some shows with the Knight Frank people? Yes, we won't do just one show. We'll do 3 shows. We'll start with Paris, then we'll do London, and then we'll finish up in March with the Wealth Report. So the new Wealth Report's coming out in March. Can't wait. So this is part of the great big 3-month buildup toward the Wealth Report that everybody is eagerly anticipating. So before I begin, let me pull up my share screen and say, there we go. That's the Wealth Report. That's the 2023 report. You can get that at knightfrank.com. Download Wealth Report with insights about the luxury markets throughout the world. Before we begin, I just want to thank our sponsor, Grace Farms. And this is the page at sharegracefarms.com where you can find out about their sips, which is the tea, and their line of coffees, which is the drips, so sips and drips. And I want to remind you that on March 26th, they're going to have a big summit to benefit the Design for Freedom initiative to try and eradicate forced labor in the building trades. And without any further ado, I just want to, let's say, unshare screen and welcome Ed and Laura. Say hello.
Thank you very much, John. Cheers, Roberto.
Very excited to have you guys. I know that when I reach out to Jason Mansfield in the London office and I say, give me 2 experts who can talk to me about Hyde Park and the Battersea Power Station, they said, these are my 2 aces I've got. Let's see, let me pull up Laura. I'm going to pull up your screen. So you are a partner and head of Hyde Park Sales. And I guess you'll tell us in a moment what that means, Hyde Park Sales. And this is Ed Hopkinson-Woolley, the senior sales negotiator in their global headquarters in London. So can we begin, I guess, with the map of London and talk to us about the market you cover in particular? Are we talking about all of London? Or are we talking about West London? And what does it mean to be in the West London?
I think, John, we could be here all day talking about the whole of London. It's so expansive, but to keep things kind of to a specific area, let's focus in on Hyde Park, where Laura has her expertise and where also most of London's high-end development is happening. We've got some incredible schemes running around the peripheries of the park. Some of the stuff where you look at one Hyde Park developed by the Candy Brothers a number of years ago, still one of London's main high-end residencies. So we look at that and drift out west where we see a huge pipeline of development happening. That's probably the best place to start. And I'll let Laura touch on Hyde Park and just going around the park and showing you the different areas first.
Yeah, so my office sits right in the middle of, let's say, Notting Hill and Marylebone. So it's just the area north of Hyde Park. And our local transport station would be Paddington. So we've got really easy access to Heathrow Express. We've just had the recent opening of the Elizabeth line, which allows you to access from Paddington to the city, access within 13 minutes. So it's become really commutable. And it's an area which essentially people love living because you are always within really close walking distance to the best parts of Hyde Park. So you've got the Italian fountains, Kensington Palace Gardens, and you're also really well positioned for access into the West End, so Mayfair, or you could be walking over to Portobello, which I know our US clients love. So, you know, it's a really well positioned area, and I run the sales team there. We're 5 people, and we essentially are selling properties from anywhere from about 500,000 up to 30, 40 million.
All right. And so
What do you-
any of these, do you want to talk about, shall we look at any of these in particular? I mean, Holland Park. Let's see, if I pull up Holland Park, that looks like new development, is it?
Yeah, stunning series of villas across just up off Holland Park itself, with views across it. Again, basically London is built around the parks. We've got so much greenery. We're lucky, a bit like you with Central Park. We've got Hyde Park. We've got the river itself as well. So a lot of these developments are situated either around the park, in the core areas like Mayfair, and for instance, Belgravia, Chelsea Barracks, another scheme that's been going up over a number of years with multiple phases, with outstanding amenities. The townhouses there, like, they are just breathtaking. So for any of your viewers who are listening for your podcast, they're going to want to open up the YouTube channels and have a look at these on the screen, because yeah, some of the interiors that are being designed there, they are world class, and that's what we'll see across most of the schemes we cover.
Are those?
Can I ask you just by looking at this, is there just looking at the architecture, are there certain standards of conformity that have to happen within these neighborhoods? Like, this is modern, yet it has an essence of something that's older.
Yeah, so typically they'll have to, the planning process in the UK is quite an interesting one. I'm not going to go into detail because that's, again, another few days worth of chat. But people often, for instance, what you've got there, Harcourt House and Edwardian structure, grade 2 listed, what they do is they've retained that front of the property to give you that historic traditional feel. And we've got a few schemes that are selling really well because of that. They bring that modern approach with the amenities, the finishes that you want from a new build, but also have that kind of nod the head towards the historic part of what London is and what London will remain. People have such ties to that historic traditional architecture, the Victorian, Edwardian, Regency eras.
You can see here in Lancer Square, they've kind of refashioned that architectural design on the typical Georgian house, with your high ceilings on the first floor and then slightly lower as you go up into the building. So it's kind of fitting into the area that it sits in.
Exactly.
I'm wondering, when I see these, I see Chelsea, I see Knightsbridge, I see Paddington, I see Marylebone. Is that what it's called? Marylebone?
Marylebone, yeah.
I knew I'd get that. I botched that. I mean, so if I come back to the map of London, are all of these equal, or are some of these more traditional, quiet, hip? I mean, so, you know, talk to me about neighborhoods before we get into specific projects.
I think the amazing thing about London is it's like a selection of little villages. As you go, if you were to look clockwise around Hyde Park there, you know, yes, we've just mentioned Marylebone. That's been a real emerging market over the last decade, with this Marylebone High Street running through the heart of it, with lots of boutique shops and cafes, great world-class restaurants. And, you know, Chiltern Firehouse moving in, which became a really popular location for celebrities, etc. So, you know, it's sort of become a bit of an extension to the well-established Mayfair area, which, you know, very traditional, very popular with international buyers. And again, world-class selection of hotels, bars, restaurants in that area, and some of London's most expensive properties and best new homes developments. And then you sort of follow it clockwise round to where it says Westminster there, but you're really going into kind of Belgravia, Knightsbridge, and that sort of follows a similar vibe in a way to Mayfair. You know, top designer shops, high streets, you know, all of this still within really easy access of the parks as well, because you've got St James's, you've got Buckingham Palace, Green Park all around there. And then coming over west, you're kind of going into that Chelsea market, historically very kind of aristocratic market, but again very popular these days with celebrities. But you're starting to move into a more kind of family market where you can get big houses with gardens, and that sort of continues up into Kensington and Notting Hill. And those markets have been incredibly popular during and post-pandemic, because they will offer those areas will offer some really substantial family houses with big gardens and kind of reaching the that kind of typical pandemic desire to have your long-term home, your safe place, your garden, outdoor space. And those markets really tapped into delivering the supply for that demand. And then you come back up a little bit further around to the north and you're back in Hyde Park.
So can I ask you something? So we were talking and we were looking at new construction earlier. And in these neighborhoods, I'm assuming they're so mature in the fact that they've been there for so many years. And I would imagine that finding the land to do new construction is very challenging. And is there resistance? Like here, sometimes there's resistance to, there's a pre-existing structure that's there that people don't want to take down. Do you have those challenges?
All the time. Multiple schemes. We've got a few that are still very much in planning. We'll see them come to the market in 2-3 years' time. But it's such a drawn out process here in the UK. But when things do come to light, for instance, we've had an incredibly successful scheme up at King's Cross. A number of buildings are now totally complete. The last building, Capella, is almost finished and we're almost totally sold out there. But the final phase will be the gas holders. So a historic landmark. If you've ever watched cricket at the Oval and seen the historic gas holders, these large steel frames that used to hold the gas years and years ago, they're building penthouses and just unbelievable apartments within these structures. So there are ways around it to kind of, as again, give that nod of the head to these old structures. Again, like you saw earlier, 8 Eaton Lane is a similar one. So that's the way of getting around these planning permissions and bringing that historical structure into play and making it work for the developer, giving people a reason to go for it over something that is just a brand new fabricated building. You want that historical factor. So yeah, it is a difficult process, but we've got so many schemes. You look at Battersea Power Station, which is again one of London's largest power stations. What you brought up there, Powerhouse at Chelsea Waterfront, that was built in 1905. It originally had 4 chimneys, 275 foot up in the air. But Sir Terry Farrell, the architect there, he's redesigned it totally. It's an original red brick of the original structure. 200 new apartments. I think it's Europe's largest atrium of 100 meters long. And people will have almost hotel style like amenities. There'll be a clubhouse, pool, gym, saunas, a restaurant on the ground floor, which you can see in that image, but right on the waterfront in Chelsea. So these homes are being created out of what was a very historical structure that was almost a cathedral of the industrial era. And it's a great way of preserving that historic skyline that we have here, and we're very lucky to have in London.
$1.5 million for something in a luxury building with water views. That sounds expensive. I mean, inexpensive. What's the catch?
I guess when it comes to these things, look, you can say, oh, I'm going to be a Riverside development, which typically sometimes adds about 40% value to any sort of property. Here, it's space, utilization. You've got 200 apartments within this building. This scheme is spread over 8.5 acres. This is technically phase 2 of a number of different phases. Phase 1 was hugely successful, which was the taller glass tower known as West Tower in Chelsea Waterfront. And I guess it's just with the volume, these developers are able to be so competitive. But this seems to be driving the interest. We get so many inquiries every week from people of all different backgrounds, whether it be Europeans, investors from overseas, even domestic, which is probably the area we've seen the most amount of interest come from. Domestic buyers, people who live in those old aristocratic Chelsea townhouses wanting to downsize but not leave that local area. So we see these guys downsizing from £5-7 million and selling up, releasing some equity and buying into a scheme such as this. So they have their pied-à-terre in central London whilst having maybe a family home out in the countryside, which we saw during the pandemic. So it's a bolt hole.
You're talking about you spoke about foreign buyers. I understand. I mean, it's not dissimilar to the US where we have a lot of foreign buyers. I understand London, like the number of foreign buyers has almost doubled in the last handful of years. So, and that there is a proposal to put some sort of tax on that. Is that likely to happen? I mean, that comes with, debatable results. Like I think in Vancouver, they did it, and some people say it was successful, and some people say it was horrific because it brought property values down. in the sense that it makes it more affordable for the local domestic people, but for the foreigners, it keeps them away. And yet it's you're generating money, yet you're depressing property value and vice versa. What's the argument, and how's that playing out there?
I think if you look back at the last 8 years in London, we've seen stamp duty reforms have a real impact on pricing. I'm looking back at, probably 8 years ago when we saw the most significant stamp duty reforms. And actually, a lot of that has been priced into the market alongside lots of other challenges that the London market has faced over the last few years. And I think, right now there's a lot of talk about tax. We've got an upcoming election. There will be lots of discussions over what happens next as these manifestos come out towards the election. I just think, though, that actually what's shown is that the London market has just been so resilient every time we've been hit with another thing like this. And what it shows us is that people are not choosing to buy in London just based on tax decisions. They're not selling just based on tax decisions. I actually think that, this is a long-term home for people. They're looking into the cultural history, the education, the reasons to live in London are, a vast financial centre, etc. And I think that, the tax comes with it, yes, but it has its benefits on other locations.
Yeah.
When you put it in the wider context.
It's an interesting one, Roberto. On that, obviously, we have seen interest rates and everything fluctuate over the past few years. And over the past 10 years, we've only seen the dollar get a little bit stronger compared to the pound. So some countries are pegged against the dollar or use the dollar. They've certainly seen even up to a 40% kind of saving from what they might have been spending back in 2007. So whereas 1 to 2, whereas now we're talking 1 to 1.26. I don't know what it is today, but that's typically where we're trading at now. So someone could have been purchasing at 8.4 million back in 2010. It's costing them 4.3 million US dollars today. So there's that increase in savings in terms of exchange rates. But as Laura quite rightly mentioned, educational facilities, ties to London. I was chatting with our international project sales team, who are prevalent over our 50 different territories that we cover. And they said, look, wherever we go, whether it be Turkey or across the Asia-Pac region, Australia, Sydney, we're saying that people have these ties to London. They'll always buy in London, not necessarily because they have family here, but because they might have a son or a child who's going to be going to university in the future. They're banking on it potentially being in London. The educational facilities around here are phenomenal. Europeans, likewise, they come here for Lycée Français, which is a West London French school, and it's highly regarded globally. So we see people go to these areas specifically for those educational facilities, knowing that London has been a safe haven over the past few years, especially what the UK has gone through.
So Brexit, in the grand scheme, was an effect, and it's come back. It's kind of rebounded.
Is that a bad word? Are we allowed to say Brexit? Is that still controversial, or have we moved on?
You have to edit that out, John, later. You're going to have to put a blooper over it.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for us, I think Brexit has been amongst many factors, as I mentioned a minute ago. I think, it's just been one other thing alongside stamp duty reforms. Then we've had Brexit, then it was the pandemic, and then, stock markets post Ukraine. There's just been one thing after another that has affected people's sentiment in the market.
That's what I was thinking. Is it's really the sentiment? The sentiment sort of, kind of deflates, and then now you're kind of getting your breath back, and it's it is what it is.
This is an interesting chart that shows a little bit of a dip during the pandemic, not too much, and I assume that the one before that, 2016, was that a result of maybe the Brexit, any anxiety over Brexit. But it looks like we're now poised to go for 5 straight years of growth projected. Is this an accurate assessment of the current mood?
Well, we've already seen, so this past January, we've already seen 0.7% increase in property values across the UK. We anticipate 3% by the end of the year, and then cumulatively over the next 5 years, probably about 18.1% across the UK market. So that's a really good sign, but at the moment, we're still seeing interest rates a bit like you guys in the US. We're seeing interest rates come down probably see some cuts by the end of the year, hopefully. No one's got a crystal ball, so can't say it verbatim, but we're hopeful that that's what's happening, and fingers crossed we continue to see inflation come off, which will only incentivize buyers more, especially for products such as new build and also just the general property market.
And what
I
is
saw
this
an.
chart?
Go
What
ahead.
is this? What's this chart? What's the purple chart underneath? It says London, US. Is this the relative amounts of investment in London and where they're coming from, or the investments made in those other markets?
I imagine it's coming in.
Okay. And so it shows about $2 billion worth of US. So it looks like we're the major, I guess, investor in the London market. Would you say that that's still true, that the US is still one of your most important markets?
Yeah, very
customers?
much so. I think, this effective discount that Ed's just been talking about is really relevant here, because not only have we seen the discount on pricing, but that difference in currency has made such a big difference for US buyers in the UK market, with effective discounts for around 40 to 50% in the last few years. And I think, that we are going to go on, I think, to talk a little bit more about the lettings market as well, but I actually think a stat that came out in our recent super prime lettings report was that I think it was around 30% of tenants in London at the super prime level were coming in from the States. So, there's definitely a lot of movement of money coming in at that kind of super prime luxury level from the US. We're sort of seeing that on the ground.
Do you get a sense of where in the US these people are coming from? Are they coming from the East Coast primarily, or are they?
Latest one, I had a lovely referral actually through Jason, who you mentioned earlier, Jason Mansfield, who works in our US team here. He's in touch with you guys and Douglas Elliman and Compass over there in the US, and they've kindly sent across a recent lead, New Yorker, looking at specifically Notting Hill. It's a market the New Yorkers know. It's got a lot of history, and it's one that they can appreciate and feel almost at home with, given how many people come across from that part of the US. So I'd say, more the East Coast at this point in time, but with other tech companies starting to open up large offices or HQs in places like Paddington, Shoreditch, or across King's Cross, we've suddenly seen people at very high level, exec levels, buying into properties in these areas. So it's happening quite a lot at this point in time.
We saw John showed that chart of the projected growth over the next couple of years. Is part of that because I see that you guys are thinking about introducing a 25-year mortgages, something that you guys don't have. We have 30-year mortgages here. Yeah. But so what's a typical mortgage there now as far as term? 5 years?
Yeah, two-year fixed or 5-year fixed.
Wow, that's a game changer. If you guys could do 25 years, that's going to bring a lot of new buyers, especially more affordable buyers into the marketplace.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think as some of you guys have already discussed, people are typically purchasing their properties around that 30-year mark in their lifetime, and then they're paying off their mortgage. Even if they move a number of different times, they're paying off that mortgage up until the age of 60. So it's one mortgage sticking with you for that long, and you can move house, you can sell the property, be free of your mortgage. But that's one thing this country is starting to push towards. But we've seen lots of different mortgage products come about. Our finance team are absolutely incredible at speaking to our clients about coming up with different solutions. For instance, from the US, you can purchase with a 25% deposit and have that 75% mortgage rate at the moment. So that's one of those things, and rates are coming down. So it's only good news really for anyone who's purchasing at this point in time for us.
That's
Roberto, let's compare it with the New York market, because I think that's where most of our audience is coming, are in New York or interested in the New York market, and they're looking at second homes, and they get job transfers back and forth to London, investment bankers and the like. Talk to me about, let's make some parallels here. I mean, the top of the London market, those Chelsea townhouses, Chelsea Barracks townhouses and the like. What's the equivalent, Roberto, in New York? Because we've been talking about the townhouse market in New York, and I believe that it's been on fire, right, for the last 10 years.
No.
No?
No. It peaked probably 2015, 2016, and then they really started suffering. The air was coming out of the balloon until really COVID, when people started to feel that I need to control my own surroundings. I don't want to be in a building. I don't want to be in an elevator with all these different people. And it started to be a bit of a resurgence. So now it's come back quite a bit. But the only thing that I can imagine that would be comparable, at least to something like Mayfair or something like that, would be like an Upper East Side townhouse that is, you know, anywhere from 8 to 10,000 square feet, a couple of blocks from the park that's selling for 20 to 40, 50, 60 million. And then, you know, you also have some really expensive houses downtown in the Village. But some of these houses are of different sizes depending upon what era they were built, right? So the houses along, go ahead.
So now just tell me what's the equivalent on the townhouse market, the upper end townhouse market in London. What are the prices I can expect to spend on a townhouse in London, and how has that changed since COVID?
I guess there's just so many different factors on pricing, and each market is so different. So in the area where I'm based in Hyde Park, you can get some really good value. And this is what's been the draw to that Hyde Park Bayswater market in the W2 postcode north of Hyde Park. We've just had a sale of a 5,000 square foot house, which was actually just sold for just over 8 million. You know, that was representing such good value. It actually went to best bids, and we had 5 parties interested, and 2 parties really went to loggerheads over that and competed over getting the property, and it sold above the asking price. But you can sort of see the value there. It's actually, you know, in comparison to Mayfair, for example, where you might be anywhere possibly between sort of £3,000 to £4,000 per square foot at least, actually, for a house. So, you know, it just depends on location. It depends on the overall offering and condition, etc., as always. But yeah, you could be probably from about 5 to 50 million, really.
I appreciate you using price per square foot and not price per meter. Thank you. It's helping me out tremendously.
Yeah, I need to clear up a bit on my prices per square meter.
See, again, that sounded inexpensive. When you said 5 million to 50, I don't think you can't get a townhouse in New York for $5 million, can you, Roberto? Anywhere.
You can, of course, yeah, you can. It's going to be on a smaller size, or it's going to be further away from the park or something like that. You can.
Okay.
You can.
Okay.
So
what other trends? Go ahead. No,
I was to say the other really cool thing that we have in London is typically these old traditional Georgian Victorian townhouses would back onto stables, and these little houses at the back, which were originally stables, have been converted into what we now call Muse houses. So you can typically pick up a sort of 1,000 to 2,000 square foot house, sort of 3-bed. They're really kind of quaint and pretty little streets. People have kind of, you know, decorated them up with their outside furniture and planting. And you can kind of pick up a house like that for anywhere from about 1.5 to 4 million, typically, across London. So you know, the offering's actually quite wide in terms of freehold house availability.
And that type of housing is sporadic throughout the city? I mean, you can find that. Okay.
Yeah, any way that you have these traditional terraces, typically, you will probably find a Muse behind it.
We were going to talk about leasing a little bit, or letting, as you say. I find all these, you said best bids, we say best and final, all these different terminologies. Do you know what percentage of your housing stock is rental property?
That's a good question, and we definitely need to check in on that. Yeah,
because I'm always fascinated, because in New York, 70% of our housing stock is rental property, which is enormous. In most cities, it's not as much. So I'm just curious, because a lot of the reading that I was doing on your marketplaces, it's very, very similar to what's happening in New York. The one thing I'm curious about is your inventory. What's happened to your inventory since like 2019, pre-COVID to now, and pricing pre-COVID to now?
From a lettings perspective, is this from a lettings perspective?
From both. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Sure. Well, supply levels have been really challenging during that period since 2019. Demand has definitely outstripped supply. Having said that, expectations and the alignment of the two from buyers and sellers, that, you know, there's been a gap, so it hasn't necessarily been constant flow of sales despite the gap of on supply and demand. But actually, and in amongst that, the lettings market has very much fluctuated in terms of supply levels, and I think a lot of that has come down to some sellers suddenly sort of finding themselves as accidental landlords. They're not getting the pricing that they would like to see achieved on their sale, and so they've opted, rather than sitting there having a vacant property in London, they've decided to let it. So we've sort of seen quite a fluctuation of supply in the lettings markets, where actually quite a few sellers have switched to becoming landlords.
I think you guys covered it on one of your more recent podcasts, the one with Sydney. I think you guys spoke very much about how purchasers may have bought a few years ago with low interest rates, and a few years on, they're really struggling to pay those off. And their mortgage has suddenly gone up to 5-7%. People are then obviously struggling to sell, but they can only sell at X without making a huge financial loss to themselves. So therefore, they are deciding, as Laura said, suddenly becoming these accidental landlords. But in terms of going back to what percentage might be rental versus ownership, I reckon historically, us as a country, very much London as a whole, is very traditional that a Londoner will own a freehold property themselves. A period townhouse is always the preferred, and the new build stock tends to go down the lettings route quite often, or just short-term ownership, and they flip them a little bit quicker. People move on, they outgrow the one bed, they move to a two, and then eventually move into a house themselves further on. So I'd say typically our central London property is probably more angled towards the ownership, but it's probably changing, and it's going to be changing over the next few years, I'm sure, much quicker than we've ever seen before.
Do you want to talk about trends, or shall we play the word association game? Where I say a word and you say the first word that comes to mind. Does that sound like fun?
Interesting. Go for it.
All right, we're gonna try that. We'll see how this goes. When I say football, you say
Chelsea.
Chelsea? We have a Chelsea fan? Okay.
Okay, so I'm not a fan, but Liverpool comes to mind because that's my team sports.
All right, we'll go with that. So you said earlier university. It's one of the big draws to the London market, university. So when I say university, what do you think of first?
Fun.
Fun.
I always said Oxford, but that's me being biased to where I was. But I think,
that's me being honest.
Yeah, but I think in terms of London universities is like the central. There's so many.
I mean, my daughter went to St. Andrews, and I think of Oxford, and I think of Cambridge, and I think of the London School of Economics. So yeah. I'm a little, it's funny when Laura says fun. But okay, we'll take it. All right, British car, right? I'm a big F1 fan, and you guys are still making great cars, great racing cars, great luxury cars. So when I say British car, I drive an Austin Healey. I love British cars. Talk to me about British cars.
Over to you.
It's got to be an Aston Martin. I think it's got to be the Aston Martin. James Bond is iconic, and when you suddenly consider James Bond driving in his silver or dark grey Aston Martin in whichever film you pick, it's iconic, and we're always going to see that Sean Connery or Pierce Brosnan face on walls all over London, and it's always going to be a British icon. So I'd say the Aston Martin's got to be up there.
Okay. How about you, Laura?
I mean, you really want to talk to me about cars?
Yeah, sure.
What's the first word that comes to your mind? I was going to say classic. Yeah, let's not talk about cars.
I was hoping Range Rover would enter the conversation.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking Range Rover.
Yeah, wow. Okay, we'll go with that. I'll give you a softball, Laura. Hyde Park. Give me an image.
So, I mean, obviously, I think of my market. I think great value for money. I think breath of fresh air, great place to live.
Okay, I want one word. This is a word association game. Give me one hot Hyde Park image.
Running.
Running.
I'd go for running.
I'd go peaceful.
Yeah, I love it. Cycle through every morning, and I run through it every other weekend. And when I come to New York, I'm going to run through Central Park. So that's what I look forward to when I'm on a trip. going and seeing something, the breath of fresh air, running.
Awesome.
Definitely a place for mindfulness. It's so nice having an office literally within about 2 minutes walk of Hyde Park. If you really do want to just get out and have a wander, soak in some green in the midst of, you know, the madness of the city, it's a pretty amazing space.
All right, I'm gonna add Roberto to this one. I'm gonna say food. Food. Give me some food.
Notting Hill. It's 2 words.
I was thinking diversity actually with London. That's just the most amazing thing about London. It doesn't matter what you fancy, there's always options, and yeah, diversity.
So that old saw, oh, British food is bland. That's a 1980s concept,
Some
right?
of
We're
us.
way past that, right?
Have you, I take it you guys have had a proper roast. I'm not talking a bit of meat and a Yorkshire pudding and some roast potatoes. I'm saying you've got it all. About 9-10 different varieties of food and condiments, etc., on your plate at once. That's what you need. Serve yourself up a Sunday roast this weekend.
So that's the new hot thing for when I think of food in London. You're thinking diversity, and roast in particular is trending.
Oh, there are people reinventing it across London. If you go to some parts, typically northeast London, Shoreditch area, actually, reinvent the roast. It's like a pancake Yorkshire pudding with everything rolled into it, like a burrito as such. So it's not just a simple plate of food. You can change it up.
You know, when I think of England cuisine, I always think about Brad Pitt. He talks about being on the set of Snatch. He said, "We used to eat potato sandwiches." He's like, starch on a starch.
No.
I think they had a limited budget.
Poor Brad Pitt.
What about this is a hyphenated word, happy hour. Where do you go?
Pub. British pub. Nothing beats it.
Any pub.
It's always good, wherever you are.
Cocktails, 2 for 1.
See, I wanted to dive. That was going to be my next word, pub culture. So let's go more than one word into this. I mean, is pub culture still a thing? And when you say pub, a lot of Americans don't know what that means. I mean, they're like, well, yeah, okay, a bar. We have bars. They have pubs. We have bars. Same thing, right? No? Yes? What is pub culture?
There's something different to where a public house is where it stems from. So this was a place where people would just come, sit, chill, have a beer, sticky floor, dark wood tables, old-fashioned beer pumps. It's just the essence of it, the slight musky smell you get when you walk in, the warmth, and maybe there's a fire in the side.
Log fire.
Yeah.
The comfy old chairs. Yeah.
It's like a living room.
Traditional.
Living room with a barmaid or barman. It works perfectly.
So I think that's a really fascinating juxtaposition with what Knight Frank is all about. We're talking about the wealth report. We're talking about new development. We're talking about what's old is new, the powerhouse, Battersea Barracks. And, so you have, the worldwide center of like the financial markets, with all respect to Wall Street, Roberto, and architecture, and diversity of food. And then you talk to me about pub culture and sticky floors, and I think, wait a minute. How do I square sticky floor pub culture with this progressive vision of the new London market?
Just gotta think of character.
Yeah.
London has so much character, and it's such a global city. I deal with individuals from every corner of the globe every day, and for me, it's always understanding. Okay, right. A buyer will come to me and they'll say, "Ed, look, I'm from here. This is what I really like to do. I like to be out. I want safety. I want a nice, quiet neighborhood." I know exactly that they should be looking towards Fulham, Chelsea, Notting Hill, Kensington. Someone says, "I want something vibrant, a bit more edgy. I want to go a bit further. I want to try loads of different bars, eat interesting foods." I might say, "Look, maybe we'll put you towards Northeast London. We'll start looking into those areas." But London's so connected. So we've seen a recent big investment into everything off what's called the Elizabeth line, which is our latest underground network, which runs from Heathrow all the way through to Canary Wharf. 45 minutes end to end. Anything along that line, things are booming because people can be anywhere in about 8 minutes. So these are becoming hubs for people around these stations, and we'll continue to see that, I think, over the coming years.
So commuting, work from home, has that affected your marketplace?
It's an interesting one. From a commercial standpoint, we anticipate way more people needing office space and expanding their footprint. So we're going to obviously see people then need to move back into London, what we've typically called or captioned the Boomerang Buyer. They left London during COVID, needing more space. After the pandemic, they've come back, they've purchased a small, as I mentioned earlier, a pied-à-terre, and they've got their 1 or 2 bed functional property in the heart of London, so they can commute on those few days a week. But we're seeing that people want, and businesses want, to be in the office more often. They want face-to-face time. Nothing beats that, and nothing ever will, especially in this day and age where we've got AI. I think face-to-face interaction always wins.
So can I ask you something? Like, so in Manhattan, on the weekends and things like that, people need, I think, and if you live in New York intensively, you almost need another place to go. We have a house in Southampton. There are people who have houses in Connecticut, people who have houses up in the Hudson Valley, things like that. Where do people in London go that's an hour and a half, 2 hours away from the city that they can go every weekend, but they'll spend their holidays there, and where perhaps during COVID, they just kind of went there?
Yeah. There are some trends. I think sometimes it depends on which part of London you live in as well, because you want easy access in and out of the city. But really popular locations for the area I'm working in, just north of the park. You've got straight out on the A40 there. You can get out to the Cotswolds, Oxfordshire, and even if you're sort of West London, you're going to be going out on the M4, M3 there down to the southwest. So Dorset, Somerset, Bath, Devon, perhaps even Cornwall, if you're willing to go a step further. But we're speaking with people all the time who are coming into London from their country properties, and it tends to be, it's probably going to be beyond those home counties just surrounding London. It's probably going to be out from so Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire, and then the southwest, as you see just
how
down
long,
there.
How long would it take to go to the coast directly south, or to go to Dover? How far? Hour and a half. That's not bad.
Down to the south. You could be down in Eastbourne quite comfortably in an hour and a half on a good run. But people do commute quite easily to London there. The average commute, I think, in the UK is about an hour and 40 for the average person. So you could be within the average if you're commuting from somewhere like Eastbourne.
Talk to me about the economics. So if I work in London and I have a second home out in Eastbourne, what does the Eastbourne market look like? Is that the $1 million average, or is it a $2 million average? Or?
No, you probably pick up I'm no expert on Eastbourne, but I know a few areas around there. But you probably get a 4 or 5 bedroom house for about 1.4. 1.4 million, and you could be looking at a much smaller footprint in Wimbledon or Fulham at 1.4 million for a 3 bedroom 1,200 square foot property, maybe 1,400 if you're lucky.
Okay. And how much land? So when Roberto goes out to Southampton, or I come out to New Canaan, 1 hour outside of Manhattan, we've got a lot of houses on 1 acre. We've got them on 2 acres, 4 acres, but a lot of 1 acre properties. How much land is enough land for these second homes?
Yeah, I think people do want their country home to provide them with that sense of green space that they're not getting in London, because just, as Ed mentioned, if you're in, say, Wimbledon and you're picking up a 3-4 bedroom terraced house, you'll typically have, a smallish rectangular garden at the back, surrounded by your fences, and then you're peering over your neighbours either side and behind you. So it's pretty tight living in comparison. But yeah, I mean, it completely varies. If you're in a rural village, you could have a number of acres around you, but Eastbourne is a town, so you're going to be up against a few other people next to you. It just completely varies.
Can I ask you, where's Surrey?
Sorry, just south of London. So if you were to go directly south for about 45 minutes, just the Surrey Hills is probably actually a prime example of where a lot of people will actually buy if they live in South London. If they've got the wealth to purchase at potentially 3, 4, 5 million, the Surrey Hills is a great example. Yeah, if you got it perfectly. That is exactly where people will buy.
I read that Surrey East Road is now the most expensive road. Is that there? I'm
Probably
assuming.
up there with the Wentworth Estate, which is just along from Surrey, further around west, where you've got one of the most exceptional golf courses in the kind of close proximity to London. But typically, your houses there, they're mansions, they're coveted mansions that everyone loves to see.
So I might live in Surrey with a small garden behind my house, but it'll be a town surrounded by these fields and rolling hills and countryside. And that's where I get my sense of green space, and I can go running on the hills. But I may only maintain a quarter-acre property, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, exactly.
You're sitting in greenbelt land there and national parks around you, so it's just a really beautiful environment to be living in.
Yeah, that's one thing that the UK definitely benefits from. Is we mentioned planning policies earlier. We're very strict, so areas of natural beauty, green belts, as Laura said, those areas are so protected that you're not going to suddenly see a new build skyscraper go up on that land. It's protected for perpetuity. So we'll often see people move towards those regions, a bit like our parks in London.
Where do you go when you go out? When you get out of London, where do you go?
All over. There's just so much to discover in the UK, and I think so many people who come into London to the UK stick to their few days in London, and yet there's just so much history across the whole country and so many beautiful parts. But personally, I love going down to the southwest. I went to university in Exeter, which is in Devon, which is just, if you pull over a little bit towards the west, a bit further, you're sort of heading down there towards Cornwall, and you've got some stunning beaches, whether you're in Salcombe, where you've got beautiful marinas and estuaries, or if we're just here, yeah. So, and then north of that, you've got amazing surfing beaches. So it's stunning. You've got some beautiful national parks down there as well.
So there, thinking about the pub culture runs like in the DNA of people from England. There's a simplicity to that, which I find interesting. Like, you go into the pub, you ask for a pint, can I get a pint of, and they're like, it's whatever we're serving. Is it still that? It's like you get what they're serving and that's it?
No, I think the emergence of these craft beers, IPAs are all the rage now. So selection is very important now.
Okay.
Usually.
Okay. So what is
fussier than you think, Roberto?
What's that?
I think we're fussier than you think.
Okay. No, I think you're a little fussy. So why London over Paris or New York?
It's going to come down to probably education. London, the UK has always been seen as that educational hub. Some of the best universities are considered to be in the UK, so I think people will always flood here, and then they'll remain. They hear about it being so great, and then they remain here. Like, I love Paris. I think it's an absolutely gorgeous city. But there are parts of London that a lot of Parisians say remind them of home. And they come over here. They like the Victorian mansion blocks that we have, nice red bricks with small little balconies you can just about hold a cup of tea on. And then New York, there are parts, little neighborhoods that resemble that culture, the way the buildings interact with people. So a lot of people will say, oh, there's a bit of New York in London, or there's a bit of Paris here. We're so entwined with the rest of the world.
I'm a huge fan of both cities you mentioned there, New York and Paris. But I think, London, it's just such an open city, liberal, diverse, and I think people really feel that they can be themselves here. So it remains so popular for so many reasons.
Where are we in the cycle of right now in the suburbs of New York? There's too little inventory, and that seems to be a problem across the United States. Where are we on the inventory picture? And let's not paint it with one brush. Talk to me about London versus the suburbs. Talk to me about the high end versus, say, the middle tier. How's the inventory right now?
Low, for sure. As we've come in, putting some context on it, last year was one of the most challenging markets I've worked in 15 years in London. And I think that, coming into some optimism at the start of 2024 has been interesting, because we've seen a 15% increase year on year compared to January last year on market appraisals, which is where we go in pitching for new properties. And actually, whilst we haven't necessarily seen that come through in instructions yet, I think sellers are still sitting on the fence a little bit, and probably spring will be the season. So probably March, April will be the time when they actually pull the trigger and bring those properties to the market. But, you know, high end, you're sort of saying across the sectors, in terms of super prime, there are actually some fantastic properties out there on the market. But I think I mentioned before about the alignment of expectations. So whilst there were 170 sales in London last year at over 10 million, I think that there are still some sellers who are really still hoping to achieve prices that they probably would have seen back in the peak around 2014, 2015. And they are sort of waiting. And actually, where you see price reductions of around 10, if a seller's really brave, 15, 20%, they are going to get absolutely flooded with interest from buyers. But that alignment is just so important at the moment. We'd have a far more buoyant market if sellers could get on board, because there are some great properties out there, but there's a few sitting around because the alignment's just not there on expectations.
What do you think? What force do you think is going, like here, our inventory has been so low because interest rates are so high, the same disparity in bid ask. So a lot of properties have not come on the market. So our inventory is tremendously tight. Our demand also is beginning to open up because the interest rates are coming down, because there's a lot of people who are sitting on the sidelines. So do you feel, I mean, I guess for us, it's going to be deal volume. Our deal volume is down 27% last year, and we're expecting the deal volume to increase. It's not going to now, because the interest rates are now going to be a little bit more moderate in their decrease than what was anticipated just a month ago. It's not going to be crazy. It's not going to be a spike, but we're anticipating a lot of activity. And then the question is, will the demand outstrip the supply, or vice versa? But I think all of them will be moving in that direction. I guess that's the same there.
Yeah, it is exactly the same as what you're just saying. And I think, you know, buyers are kind of settling into a new mortgage norm. We're accepting that, you know, they went right up to, rates went up to 6.5% towards the end of last year. They've come down to 4.5%. We're not seeing any sign that the Bank of England are going to change those interest rates for a while. Mortgage rates have come down to 4.5%, and we're not seeing any sign either that they might change significantly until potentially later in the year. So I think buyers are accepting. They've sat on the fence during 2023, trying to wait and see what happens, but they're frankly getting quite bored. They really want to find their long-term home, and they're out hunting. And like I just said, the moment those prices come down a little bit on things which have been sitting around on the market, buyers are flocking to it. I mean, just after Christmas, we'd put something under offer just before Christmas when a price came down. Another buyer came along and offered higher, having seen it just before it went under offer. We call that gazumping over here. I think, you know, that's happening on a few things at the moment, which is a real sign to us that the market actually may have bottomed out, because buyers are starting to outbid each other. And I do think it's because they're just really quite fed up with not moving.
Yeah. On that, actually, it's really interesting. So from the new homes perspective, we might cover a stack of units, as we call it, where we've got the first, second, third, all the way up to 10th floor, and that's the same unit. It might be the same one bedroom, for argument's sake, but they're all slightly differently priced. Gets a bit more expensive the higher you go up because of views. Let's say last year we had all 10 sat on the market. This year we've already seen like an 8% increase in number of registrations, buyers looking for product. And we've said, right, okay, actually, look, last year we may have only sold the 8th or 9th floor. This year we're now seeing people go, oh, right, I want the 10th. Oh, that's gone. I was looking at the 7th end of last year. Oh, that one's also gone. So we're starting to see buyers, okay, if you're not quick, you're going to miss out, because other people are now just starting to shake off New Year. They've rubbed their eyes. They've gone, right, okay, what's the plan for 2024? Oh, it's buy a property. And suddenly we're realizing, oh, we're late to the mark. We've missed the boat on that one. We're going to have to go for a secondary area. We're going to have to make a compromise here. So if people are a little bit slow and they aren't quick at speaking to their mortgage broker or their finance team, they need to really get a move on and just make sure that they're in that position to press go. Otherwise, they will miss out.
And that is exactly what happened on that property with the gazumping.
Wow.
Gazumping. I love that. Let's talk about cash buyers. We're seeing Across the United States, I think we could say that it's about 1/3. But in the New York market, we're seeing about 2/3 of all deals are cash deals. In some markets, hot markets, such as Palm Beach, we're seeing as much as 90%. We're seeing, and generally in the hot markets of southeastern Florida. So where are we in terms of cash buyers, since you mentioned interest rates being a factor, and you also mentioned people who may have sat on the sidelines in 2023 entering this spring market, finding that it's more competitive than they thought. How important is it? And is it a function of being in competition with others, or is it a function of being disappointed by the interest rates of 4.5%?
I think it's you're in a great position if you're a cash buyer. In the second-hand market, I'm sure Laura will agree, it's a great position to be in when you're competing against other buyers. From the new homes perspective, it really depends on how finance is done. So depending on whether developers leverage themselves, will depend on whether they take that as position. But it means you can transact quicker, which I'm sure Laura will say is a really great way to enter into negotiation, being a cash buyer.
Is it 1/3? Is it 2/3 like New York?
Oh, it's hard to say, but
it's changed quite a lot. I mean, if you look at the last quarter of Q3 with those 6.5% interest rates, we were not really selling to mortgage buyers at that point in time. And actually, those cash buyers who were out in that period probably bought quite well in that time. But I'd say it's balancing out. I mean, I can only say from experience in the office that I'm working in, without having stats in front of me, probably 50-50 at the moment.
Yeah, it's starting to get to a point where people realize actually there's still some value in taking out a mortgage, taking out a financial loan. It works for them at the moment. Some people are actually now pushing to that, even if they are cash rich. I've got a few clients at the moment who have decided to take on finance just because of certain future taxes they might incur, but obviously cater to the right person.
That's particularly prevalent as well, where parents are buying for their children. First-time buyers are not particularly in the market at the moment with these interest rates, and so where parents are helping, they are future planning as well in terms of tax, inheritance tax. So borrowing kind of works.
Yeah.
So we're getting toward the end of our show. I want to thank our sponsor, Grace Farms. I want to thank Knight Frank. I want to remind everybody that the Wealth Report's coming out in about a month. We're very excited about that. And I want to ask you both for sort of advice for those entering the London market and predictions.
You want to start, or shall I?
The first thing that's coming to my mind is probably almost don't think too much about it. If you want to buy, crack on, go with it, find your dream home. I mean, London has remained incredibly resilient during so many challenges that we've faced over the last few years. Get to know your agents really well and make sure they know what you're looking for. Because I think, people want to be first to hear about things. So if you're in touch with us, we'll know, and we will be picking up the phone to you straight away.
Literally, words out my mouth. I was going to say, be in touch, communicate. You'll see so many properties in London, especially some of the higher end stuff, some of the more sought after properties, they'll go off market. We've got incredible buying agent arm, the buying solution, who will often source property off market. But without contact with a broker or an agent like Laura and I, it's going to be so hard for you to find the right thing. We're here to educate the buyers. So the more you speak to us, the more you give us, the more we can help you find the right deal for you, the right property in the right location where you actually wish to remain, rather than upping and leaving in 5 years' time. It's a home to stay. But yeah, certainly it's just be educated, be in touch, and be ready to move. Don't sit around twiddling your thumbs.
So I'll let Roberto get the last word, but what I've learned in the episode, what I've heard, is that London is an incredibly stable market with expectations of 3% growth every year for the next 5 years. That buyers are starting to realize that, and those that were sitting on the sidelines are now entering the market, and you're seeing a period of increased demand. I'm hearing that there's plenty of options still available. We looked at the map of new development all around the Hyde Park market. We talked about the suburban market also with opportunities. So while there's decent amount of inventory, I guess what I'm hearing from you is that, and basically I'm hearing about a market that is benefiting from a flight to safety. In a market where we're seeing a lot of turbulence around the world and anxiety and a presidential election, we're seeing a lot of investment coming into London, and you're saying it's a stable market and it's benefiting from that dynamic. And the best thing I can do is develop a relationship with a London market expert and get into the market this spring. Is that pretty much what I'm hearing?
Beat the rush. I think you're bang on
Beat the
there.
rush.
Beat the rush.
Where'd you hear, Roberto?
I'm just stunned by how similar the markets are behaving between New York and London right now. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's an election year, it's an inventory situation, it's a demand situation, it's interest rates, it's so similar at this point where it hasn't been really that much in the past. So I feel like I understand the marketplace there. Not that I know the property. I'll be in touch once they do a couple more deals here.
Yeah, always welcome.
We'll speak soon, Roberto, I'm sure.
Indeed.
Thank you
Thank you
both.
guys so much.
We want to
Thank
do
you.
this again. We want to check in with you after the spring market and find out how it went. But thank you very much. This was an incredibly informational show. I mean, I learned so much, and wow, I'm excited to come on over and check it out.
We look forward
Thanks,
to
guys, so
meeting
much.
you.
Real pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.